My daughter stood up in my own boardroom and said I wasn't mentally fit to run the company. The board agreed to vote. She was confident she had the numbers. What she didn't realize was that the vote didn't matter, because she was counting hands. I was counting something else. And by the time the lawyer cleared his throat, her promotion had already turned into a problem. My name is Richard Hale. I started this company at 32 with a folding desk, a rented office above a hardware store, and one client who paid 30 days late. There were no investors. No safety nets. Just contracts I negotiated myself and risks I signed in ink that kept me awake at night. For decades, I built it piece by piece. I hired the first 10 employees personally. I approved every expansion. I sat through recessions, lawsuits, supply chain collapses, and buyout offers that would have made early retirement easy. I didn't sell. I didn't step aside. I reinvested. Growth was slow at first, then steady, then exponential. We moved from that rented office to our first headquarters, then to a glass building downtown with our name on it. I remember the day the sign went up. I remember thinking, this is what endurance looks like. My daughter grew up watching it happen. She did her homework at the conference table during late meetings. Interned in college. Earned her MBA. I was proud of that, still am. I didn't hand her a title. She worked her way up through operations, then strategy. Smart. Efficient, decisive. Over time, people started looking at her when I entered the room, just for a second longer than before. Not out of disrespect. Out of transition. I noticed. Age changes the temperature in a room. Not suddenly. Gradually. Conversations become slightly slower when directed at you. Decisions get double-checked. Suggestions get reviewed. Last quarter, she began scheduling more meetings without me. This quarter, she scheduled one with me. An executive performance discussion, and that's when I realized this wasn't succession planning. It was positioning. The meeting invite didn't say removal. It said leadership continuity discussion. Neutral. Harmless. Almost respectful. When I walked into the boardroom, the projector was already on. Slides prepared. Financial charts displayed. My daughter stood near the head of the table, not in my seat, but close enough to suggest rehearsal. Everyone was there. Even the independent directors who rarely attend mid-quarter reviews. That told me everything. She began smoothly. Revenue growth charts. Market volatility. Industry shifts. Artificial intelligence integration. Digital restructuring. All accurate. All polished. Then came the pivot. For us to remain competitive, she said calmly, we need adaptive leadership that reflects current operational velocity. Operational velocity. A consultant's phrase. One of the board members asked what she meant. She didn't hesitate. We've seen slower response times on executive approvals, she continued. Delayed strategic pivots. Missed innovation windows. She wasn't raising her voice. She was building a case. A performance narrative. I let her finish. She clicked to the final slide. Executive Transition Framework. There it was, structured, bullet-pointed, timed. Temporary medical evaluation. Interim leadership assignment. Vote to confirm acting CEO. Polite. Clinical. Then she said it. For the good of the company, I recommend we initiate a competency review of the current CEO. The room shifted. No outrage. No drama. Just silence thick enough to measure. She looked around the table, confident. Counting support. I remained still. Because while she was presenting performance metrics, I was reviewing structure. And structure always matters more than sentiment. I didn't respond immediately. Experience has taught me that when someone believes they control the room, the most powerful move is patience. Let them feel momentum. Let them assume inevitability. Around the table, directors shifted in their chairs. A few avoided eye contact. A few didn't. My daughter stood composed, hands lightly resting on the back of the chair beside her, close enough to authority to taste it. Before we proceed to a vote, she said, I believe governance requires transparency. Governance. Interesting word to use in a company whose governance model I personally designed. Most of the board know I retained a significant equity stake. What many of them didn't fully understand, what my daughter apparently hadn't revisited, was how that equity was structured when we expanded 15 years ago. When the company scaled nationally, investors demanded public confidence. I agreed, with conditions. We created a dual-class share structure. Standard shares for public investors. Enhanced voting shares retained by founders. It wasn't ego. It was protection. I remember the attorney asking if I was certain I wanted weighted control tied to specific triggers. I was, because growth attracts ambition. And ambition, if unchecked, often confuses management with ownership. Over time, as the company prospered, those structural details faded into background noise. Quarterly earnings overshadowed charter clauses. Strategy eclipsed governance fine print. But structures don't disappear because people stop reading them. They remain quiet, binding. Across the table, my daughter spoke about leadership modernization and stakeholder confidence. She spoke fluently, convincingly. What she didn't mention, perhaps because she didn't think it relevant, was that founder class shares carried 10 votes for every one standard share. And those shares weren't in my personal trading account. They were held inside an irrevocable voting trust. A trust designed to activate under one specific condition. A formal challenge to the founder's competency or authority. The moment she framed this as a competency issue, she wasn't removing me. She was triggering something else. The chairman cleared his throat and suggested we proceed in an orderly manner. It was the kind of phrase companies use when something disorderly is about to happen politely. My daughter sat down, composed, hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. In her mind, the outcome was procedural now. I could almost see her calculating it, 3 guaranteed votes, 2 likely, 1 undecided but persuadable. A clean majority. The motion was restated. Initiate a formal competency evaluation of the current CEO and appoint interim leadership pending review. A director to my left raised his hand first. Then another. Measure.com. Professional. It would have looked convincing to anyone unfamiliar with the difference between a headcount and control. When the chairman began tallying verbally, company counsel, who had been unusually quiet, leaned forward. Before we finalize the vote, he said carefully, we need to calculate weighted voting authority under the charter. The room paused. My daughter frowned slightly. Weighted? She asked. Yes, counsel replied, opening a thin binder he'd clearly prepared in advance. Founder class shares carry enhanced voting rights, particularly in matters involving executive displacement. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. One looked directly at me for the first time all morning. The chairman hesitated. Can you clarify the impact? Counsel adjusted his glasses. If this motion is formally classified as a competency challenge, it activates Section 4.2 of the corporate charter. That section reassigns weighted authority to the founder trust for review and approval. Silence fell harder this time. My daughter's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Confidence recalibrating into uncertainty. What does that mean numerically? She asked. Counsel answered evenly. It means the founder class trust controls 62% of the total voting power in this motion, not shares. Power. The raised hands around the table were still in the air. They just didn't carry the weight she thought they did. You could almost hear the recalculation happening. Hands slowly lowered around the table, not because anyone had changed their mind, but because the math had just changed the outcome. My daughter remained still, but the composure she wore so easily earlier had begun to thin. That can't be right, she said carefully. Not emotional. Controlled. Founder shares were diluted during expansion. Economically, yes, company counsel replied. Voting authority, no. The dual-class structure preserved weighted control under specific governance triggers. She turned toward me then. Finally, you never mentioned that. I didn't need to, I answered evenly. It's in the charter. The chairman asked counsel to continue. He did. Section 4.2 also states that if a competency challenge is initiated against the founder without independent medical certification filed prior to the motion, the voting trust temporarily consolidates all founder class authority and suspends executive displacement until review. The word suspended landed heavily. My daughter blinked once. So this vote cannot proceed as structured, counsel finished. Silence followed. Not polite silence this time. Strategic silence. What she had framed as leadership modernization was now legally categorized as a governance trigger. And governance, unlike ambition, does not bend under pressure. She leaned back slightly. We can restructure the motion, she suggested. Reclassify it as succession planning. Counsel shook his head. The language used in the presentation and minutes already references competency concerns. That activates the clause, precision matters, especially in rooms built on documentation. I folded my hands on the table. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. There was no need. She had tried to move me through performance narrative. Instead, she had stepped directly onto structural ground I poured myself. And in corporate law, just like in construction, you don't challenge the foundation unless you're prepared for what holds it up. The meeting didn't adjourn immediately. No one rushed for the door. Corporate crises rarely explode. They settle like pressure in a sealed room. My daughter recovered first. Fine, she said calmly. If the vote can't proceed, we table it. We revisit governance structure next quarter. Efficient. Strategic. Retreat without surrender. But counsel wasn't finished. There is one more implication, he added, voice steady. Section 4.2 also mandates an automatic internal governance review when a founder competency challenge is initiated without prior medical certification. My daughter's expression sharpened. A review of what? Executive decision-making authority exercised in the preceding 12 months, he replied, particularly any actions involving capital allocation, acquisitions, or related party transactions. That changed the temperature in the room, because the last 12 months had been hers. She had led the Accelerated Expansion Initiative, approved the Overseas Partnership, authorized the short-term debt facility to finance rapid scaling, bold moves, applauded publicly, riskier. Privately, the chairman looked uneasy. Is the review discretionary? No, counsel answered. It is automatic under the trust protections. Protections, not punishments, not accusations, protections. I watched her process that, not fear. She wasn't reckless, but exposure, every ambitious decision now subject to formal audit because she chose to frame leadership as instability. I acted in the company's best interest, she said firmly. I'm sure you did, I replied quietly, and the review will confirm that. That's the thing about governance structures. They don't assume guilt, they assume verification. Several board members shifted their posture. Subtly, not against her, not for me, toward stability. The chairman finally spoke. Will suspend. This matter pending counsel's review. Suspend. The word echoed differently this time. She hadn't lost her position, but she had lost control of the narrative. And in a company built on structure, narrative is never the strongest pillar. Authority is. The boardroom emptied slowly after that. Conversations were quieter now, measured, cautious. Directors who had raised their hands earlier avoided decisive eye contact on their way out. Governance has a way of humbling confidence. My daughter remained seated until we were nearly alone. The glass walls that once made this room feel powerful now made it feel exposed. You planned this, she said finally. No, I replied calmly. I prepared for it. There's a difference. She looked at the city skyline through the window, the same skyline she once admired as a child when I brought her to the office on weekends. You could have told me, she said. Not accusatory. Just frustrated. I wanted you to lead, I answered. But leadership isn't taking control. It's understanding structure before you try to move it. The internal review concluded 3 weeks later. Her decisions were bold but defensible. No misconduct, no fraud. Just ambition moving faster than governance prefers. I did not remove her. Instead, I restructured authority. I transitioned myself to executive chairman, retaining voting control through the trust. She became CEO officially, but under a clarified governance framework that required dual authorization on major capital moves. Not a punishment. A boundary. At the next shareholder meeting, I stood beside her as she presented the quarterly results. She was confident again, but steadier. Measured. Afterward, in the quiet of my office, she paused at the door. I miscalculated, she admitted. Yes, I said gently. You did. Then I added, never confuse management with ownership. And never challenge a foundation without reading the blueprint. She nodded once. The company remained intact. The structure held. And she finally understood what I had known from the beginning: titles can be voted on, but control is designed.